We talk about the aquifer a lot here on KENS 5. The levels, the history, and the results, which lately has led to water restrictions, especially here in San Antonio. But we still receive many questions like, what is the Edwards Aquifer? Why is it important? How does this affect me? And who is Edward? Well, in this KENS 5 special, we aim to answer those questions and more, because the aquifer is a vitally important natural resource, and it's alive beneath your feet every single day. It's truly San Antonio's hidden heartbeat. Weather Chief Bill Taylor kicks us off with a look at the Education Outreach Center with the Edwards Aquifer Authority.
So the recharge zone is one of the 3 zones of the Edwards Aquifer. There's the contributing zone, the recharge zone, and then the artesian zone. The recharge zone is the smallest, but it's also the most vulnerable part of the aquifer. And when I say vulnerable, I just mean it's got cracks, caves, fault lines, sinkholes right at the surface. So we've got tons of limestone. Let's just say the recharge zone is full of holes. So if anything were to spill in the recharge zone, it's a direct conduit, or it could be straight into the Edwards Aquifer.
So any type of spill must be watched in the recharge zone, because with water near the surface, this is the area where water is most susceptible to contamination.
So that's really why we're put up those signs that say now entering the recharge zone, because we need to be really careful in this little part of the aquifer. This is where our water is recharging. And if there's a lot going on, there's a lot of people there, and so people really need to watch what they put into the ground. And so it can be anything from pesticides to, picking up after your dogs or your cats, or big box stores that have different chemicals, paints, anything that might get into the Edwards Aquifer, anything you wouldn't want to drink.
And that's so important. This is our primary water source, our drinking water. And getting to know where it is and what it does for our everyday life is the beginning to understanding the crucial source beneath our feet. But who's Edward, and why is it called the Edwards Aquifer?
It's called the Edwards Aquifer because it's made out of Edwards limestone. So at some point there was a person named Edwards who, they named the rock after, but our aquifer is made out of Edwards limestone.
And while the aquifer is vast and extends across Texas, the water's finite, and we need rain to fall in the right area to maintain our water source, specifically into the contributing zone, where water is mostly collected.
The contributing zone is the big part that catches the water and it moves it down to the next part where it needs to go.
So the contributing zone is where we need rain to fall to help recharge.
Every time it rains, water falls from the contributing zone, it gets to the recharge zone, and it recharges it. The water sinks straight in because we've got all of those cracks, caves, fault lines, and limestone right at the surface. So that's where the water goes into the ground.
And the way we collect water is through the artesian zone.
The artesian zone is where water comes out of the aquifer. So like the juice box or even a bottle of water, if you squeeze it, if you put enough pressure on it, water goes up. Okay, so as long as there's water going down the contributing zone, down the recharge zone, if there's water going down, 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 that creates pressure and the water shoots up through springs and wells. So the artesian zone, it's under artesian pressure, is where the water comes out of the ground.
The aquifer level that we give you on the newscast, this is from the J17 well. It's a daily reading, 629.7 feet. But the number we watch closely that establishes watering rules in San Antonio with the San Antonio water system is the 10-day average. It's this number right here in the middle, which today is at 628.2. When you see where that is on our stage prediction here, we've got a 10-day average of 660 feet. We go to stage 1. When it drops to 650, stage 2, 640, stage 3, and so on. In fact, right now you can see we should be at stage 4 because the 10-day average is below 630 feet. But because the San Antonio water system has a number of other water sources, we're avoiding stage 4, and right now we are in stage 3.
So when you see stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, as the water goes lower and lower in that J17 well, that's the one that we're measuring. As you see the water go lower and lower and lower, we start to go into our levels of water restrictions, or just we start to cut back 20%, 30%, 40%.
And the wells aren't the only way to analyze aquifer water levels.
Also, it's not just J17 or J27, but we also take into account the amount of water that's coming out of the springs. Depending on the Comal Springs, depending on the San Marcos Springs, depending on J27, J17, we take all of those numbers into account to kind of figure out exactly how much water we have.
And as the EAA continues with conservation and research, this helps with further understanding of the Edwards Aquifer.
As we get more and more water, with conservation, we're learning more and we're using it more wisely. So we are getting more and more people, but we're also, using the water. We're being a lot smarter about how we use water, and we have lots of different things, different measures put into place so that we don't run out of water.
Because ever since 2022, we've been in a rainfall deficit, one of the worst droughts in decades. Yes, some rain here, some rain there, but collectively, the aquifer has not been fully replenished.
People don't think that we're in a drought, and so I always ask, are we in a drought right now? And people say, no. Actually, we are. We've been in a drought for a very long time, and a lot of times people will say, it just rained yesterday. And then I have to explain that it depends on where it rains too. Whether it rained on the drainage area, on the recharge zone, or the artesian zone. It has to rain in the right place for it to recharge.
So that's just the surface, or at least the first few layers of the aquifer. The next question is, how do we retrieve this water? Because this is our water source, but we need a channel to connect us directly to the aquifer. That's where wells come into play. Wells serve as a conduit that can be hundreds to thousands of feet deep. These wells retrieve something vital, something important, an important purpose that physically connects us to the aquifer, providing access to drinking water, and not just for daily use, but for agriculture and industries that provide a stable water supply. So when you hear us reporting on the aquifer levels here on KENS 5, it's done by monitoring these exact wells that bridge San Antonio to its most vital water resource.
KENS 5 meteorologist Paul Morales took a field trip with groundwater regulation manager Roger Andrade, who monitors the integrity of these wells.
It's important to maintain a well in good working condition and to maintain the surface condition of the well, and sometimes to evaluate the subsurface condition and ensure that a well is in good condition and does not pose a risk to water quality.
When checking the aquifer, the main monitoring wells are the J17 and the J27, and these help determine water quality and availability.
J27 in Uvalde and J17 in San Antonio are important because they serve as index wells for water levels in those respective pools, and they are used to trigger and manage the critical management period.
Index wells are located in the artesian zone of the aquifer, where water naturally flows to the surface, allowing for accurate readings daily, observations that have been extremely low due to drought the last few years. So wells help determine water management and restrictions in our area, and there are so many located across the region.
We've got about 17,000 wells in our database. All types of wells, the plugged wells, non-Edwards wells, and shallow non-Edwards wells and deep non-Edwards wells, because we need to differentiate between Edwards wells and non-Edwards wells. So in some areas you have both, and we need to know, hey, that's an Edwards well and this one's not.
Because any type of contamination must be monitored, especially in the recharge zone of the aquifer, where water is the most susceptible.
The recharge zone is where Edwards is at the surface, and any water flowing across that surface can enter into the aquifer. On the artesian zone, there's formations above the Edwards that are protective of the Edwards. So the only way for something flowing across the artesian zone is to enter through a borehole.
So keeping a close eye on these wells is of the utmost importance for Roger and his team.
Just to help evaluate the condition and the specifications of the well, depth to Edwards, depth of casing, and things like that. Our Aquifer Science group, they have equipment in wells that are used for monitoring and other things like that. But the tools we use strictly to evaluate a well's condition and specifications.
Now, since there are so many wells across Texas, what if you find one? And if you're curious to establish your own well?
Buying a piece of property and there's a water well on that property, a water well can be a big asset or it can be a big liability.
How can it be a liability?
Because if it's a deteriorated well and it poses a risk to water quality, you're going to have to do something about that well. You're going to have to fix it or plug it or something.
Probably the simplest thing, if you're not going to use it, is plug it
Plug it,
proper,
yes, yes,
properly.
yes, yes.
Roger, I'm going to test you a little bit.
Okay.
Late 1800s, early 1900s. They're like, man, this place is awesome because there is water
Right.
underneath here.
Yes.
All we got to do is dig. Of course, it's limestone. It's not an easy process.
Right, yes. Exactly.
Okay, let's say somebody's watching and they're like, hey, I want to put a well. Do you know the process?
Well, yeah, depending where they are, they're going to drill in the Edwards Aquifer well, they would submit a permit application to this team, and we would review everything that they submit,
Okay.
and probably issue the construction permit.
Okay.
They may need other permits from other agencies, or depending where they are.
What if somebody says, you know what, I don't need a permit? What will eventually happen?
If somebody's drilling an Edwards well without a permit, then potentially the license is at risk.
Okay, so that's the way we make sure that everybody is following the proper channel.
And the work Roger is doing with this team is tedious, but every step in looking down this well tells him so much about the aquifer.
So I'm gonna take a guess, Roger. This is not my expertise, but I'm gonna guess that high gamma is bad.
Well, no, high gamma is going to tell us we're in a clay or a shell.
Oh, okay.
And there's,
So not necessarily high or low is bad.
No,
Maybe
right.
inconsistency is
No,
bad.
It's going to tell us what formation we're in.
Okay.
The real clay above the Edwards is going to have a high gamma count.
Okay.
The Buda limestone above the real clay is going to have a low gamma count. So we're going to see that signature going into the Edwards. It's across our region, and we know when a well is into the Edwards.
Okay. So you know what to look for.
Yes.
The next big step is cleaning this water. After the water leaves the artesian zone and the well, where does it go and how is it cleaned? Meteorologist Jeremy Baker has the details, so as you can see, this doesn't just affect some of us, it affects everyone.
Having a diverse supply of water is vital to San Antonio and South Texas, and so is protecting each source of water to make sure it is safe from the source all the way to your tap.
We're protecting the aquifer and we're making it more sustainable so that we'll always have these springs flowing and we'll always have water in the wells supplying our neighborhoods and supplying our farms and our recreation downstream.
If you have all of your eggs in one basket, one water supply, if that water supply begins to dry up, you need to have other sources available.
Here at the Edwards Aquifer Outreach Center, you can take a look at the journey of water through the Edwards Aquifer. As rain falls upon the contributing zone, it works its way into the recharge zone through faults and fissures, and finally it is stored in the pool of the aquifer before being drawn up to the surface through wells and natural springs. Learning about how the aquifer works is extremely important for future generations.
It's really to get them to understand that it actually comes from beneath their feet and that it's not an unlimited supply, and that actually we're kind of in a drought right now, so it's even more critical to conserve and protect the system.
But the Edwards Aquifer is not our only source of water in San Antonio. There's also the Carrizo Aquifer, which stretches from the Rio Grande in South Texas to parts of Arkansas and Louisiana. The Trinity Aquifer, including the Eastern Hill Country, it was the first non-Edwards Aquifer drinking water to pass through SAWS pipelines. Also, the Simsboro Aquifer, which is the largest non-Edwards Aquifer supply in our city's history. And finally, the Wilcox Aquifer, which produces 10 million gallons per day of drinking water. But don't forget about Canyon Lake. It delivers purified Canyon Lake water to Northwest San Antonio. How does SAWS make sure our water is safe to drink? All of the different sources are blended and some treated at several plants located across Bexar County.
That water all goes into the same pipeline. So as that water is mixed together, you don't know whether you're getting water from the Edwards Aquifer or from the Simsboro Aquifer or from some other source. We try to make sure that all of that water is the same exact coming out of your pipe.
The Texas Water Development Board recognizes 9 major aquifers and 22 minor aquifers across the state. They are a critical source of water, supplying 55% of the water used in the state as of 2020. 32% of the water we use to meet municipal demands comes directly from groundwater. Groundwater that right now is lacking thanks to a multi-year drought.
Drought has been a very perpetual issue for San Antonio, for the entire region, and that's why it's important for us to diversify our water supplies and to develop new water supplies.
We all rely on the aquifer for drinking water, not to mention the aquatic life that lives near and inside the aquifer itself, like salamanders, beetles, and several species of fish. full of life in an area most have never seen. Roxy Van Rooten has more.
Deep below the Texas Hill Country lies a lifeline for millions, the Edwards Aquifer. But it's not just about water for our faucets. This is also home to some of the rarest and most fascinating creatures on Earth. And now a major effort is underway to protect them.
The Edwards Aquifer isn't just an underground reservoir, it's a dynamic system made up of 3 distinct zones.
The Edwards Aquifer is made up of 3 zones, the contributing, the recharge, and the artesian zone, all different, but all with a specific purpose.
So anything that falls into the recharge zone has the potential to get into our drinking water.
All right, Roxy, watch this. The Edwards Aquifer in action.
But the aquifer does more than provide water for people. It also sustains unique ecosystems and protects several endangered species that call the springs home.
We've put together this program to maintain the habitat and other aspects that ensure the security of these species across the region.
Despite its importance, the Edwards Aquifer faces growing challenges, including severe drought and increasing water demand from population growth.
We've been in a drought for a very long time, and a lot of times people will say it just rained yesterday. And then I have to explain that it depends on where it rains too. Whether it rained on the drainage area, on the recharge zone, or the artesian zone. It has to rain in the right place for it to recharge the Edwards Aquifer.
So what the plan does is in one sense, it allocates water between the two. And the spring flow protection measures that are incorporated into the habitat conservation plan, those are what protect the environmental flows when we get into these periods of severe drought like we're in right now.
One innovative solution to protect endangered species involves refugia programs, specialized facilities that act as a safety net for aquatic life.
We have refugia programs where we've partnered with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, where we actually keep species off-site in case they need to be reintroduced later. We have various monitoring programs that we go and we ensure that the species have proper habitat. We're meeting thermal requirements, we're meeting aerial requirements, that they have places to go.
Education plays a key role in ensuring future generations understand the importance of the aquifer and the need to protect it.
We're not asking for more electricity or more power, we want more water, right? And you can't just pick it up and plug it in. We have to wait for it to rain and recharge all on its own.
The Edwards Aquifer is more than just a source of water. It's the foundation of life for Central Texas. Through innovative conservation efforts, education, and community support, we can protect this vital resource for generations to come.
So you have learned not just about the aquatic life, but how water is cleaned, where we retrieve water through the help of wells, and what precisely the aquifer does for us on a daily basis. But behind the scenes, scientists are hard at work studying so much, like how and where rainwater flows across the different zones. In addition to that, the topography of the aquifer that extends across the great state of Texas. Here's a look at some of the research the EAA is doing.
This has really become the center of a lot of our research, and most of that research is focused on better understanding essentially surface water groundwater interaction.
Mark Hamilton is the Executive Director of Aquifer Management at the EAA. He's responsible for research, data collection, modeling, and aquifer protection.
What we're hoping to do here is better understand those mechanisms behind that process and then work to enhance that so that we can really functionally maintain the historical functionality of this aquifer system.
Making the most out of the water we receive during the dry and wet seasons. And that involves research on not just rainwater and how it flows, but how these different aquifers interact with each other.
At how both the Edwards and the Trinity behave, how they talk to each other, and how we can kind of optimize that surface component of recharge, that land-based component of recharge, by building structures that optimize soil health and vegetation, where your soil actually is more accepting of runoff water. So it will hold more runoff, it will infiltrate more runoff, and that's really a benefit to everyone.
By the way, our aquifer is a karst aquifer, meaning it's formed over soluble rock types, like limestone, but interacting with somewhat acidic waters. For example, rainwater contains to some degree carbonic acid. This reaction between rain and land has created extremely high permeability in the aquifer, meaning water is able to pass through and flow efficiently.
It recharges more easily, more quickly. The Trinity is probably less studied, certainly less regulated. The Edwards is very regulated. There are groundwater districts that do regulate the Trinity Aquifer, but not necessarily in the same fashion that the Edwards is regulated. The Trinity is generally, if you think of the hill country, or you could even think of it as this, you know, generally speaking across the north side of Bexar County, if you're north of 1604, you're probably going to be on the Trinity Aquifer. In some places it doesn't yield a lot of water, in some places it does. But going all the way out well into the hill country, that's all Trinity Aquifer.
These aquifers have layers and vary by geographical location. They work together, generating a massive water source, which we can see through channels and flow patterns.
Really recharge and understanding flow paths, understanding how the Trinity and Edwards talk to each other or communicate. But we also do a number of different things, like we have 74 real-time rain gauges across this region, across 22 counties.
And not just rain accumulation, but towers that measure evapotranspiration, which helps to see the overall water balance of our system. Also, water sampling at the Comal and San Marcos Springs.
It's like going to your doctor to get a checkup. We always want to know what the health of the system is. And if we take samples and we analyze those samples, we can kind of monitor the health of the system.
Look around. Be sure any well around you is registered, because this helps aquifer research.
The reason we do that is if something did happen, we would know, oh, well, we know there's a number of wells right here, and we could reach out to those people and let them know that, you know, you need to be cognizant there was a spill of some sort. And typically, if it's a spill that we're really concerned about, we'll take a lot of samples in the area to ensure that we have confidence that it's not contaminating anybody's wells.
All emphasizing and ensuring water quality for Texans.
Water quantity and water quality, they're both important. You can have all the water in the world, but if it's of poor quality, it doesn't do you a lot of good. So these practices do offer potential for improved or at least maintaining the natural health, the natural functionality of the system. Preliminary work does indicate that the different types of land management practices that we're conducting here probably do provide a net benefit, both to water quantity and quality.
Water is the most vital resource we have, and this part of Texas is so special because of the Edwards Aquifer. The KENS 5 weather team is here to dive into information about the aquifer and share it with you every single day. Be sure to follow our aquifer stories and weather updates on KENS 5 TV and KENS 5 Plus. Thanks for joining us for this look at San Antonio's Hidden Heartbeat.